Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I am back after a kind of arduous week. I had overnight trips to Boston and Washington, D.C. for work, a 7-mile hike in the Catskills with a friend, which also included 2,000 feet of uphills, Sunday morning podcast in New York City, and then the uncomfortable vibe of a Father's Day late lunch with my old man. And I made it through. The work stuff, Boston and Washington, meant presenting, schmoozing, lobbying, and 3 of the 4 legs of that trip meant getting up crazy early to catch trains. So I kind of ran myself ragged, to be honest. I did also rediscover my love for the quiet car over the first class car on the Acela, which is the higher speed train in the Northeast Corridor here in the U.S. First class is a lot more expensive. It does bring complimentary meals and coffee, and maybe the seats are a little more comfortable. But when the quiet car is actually quiet, and trust me, on the trip down to Washington on Monday, the guy sitting next to me blew up on the people behind us when they wouldn't stop talking. The quiet car is the best. You can just zone the hell out, take in the landscape, do some work, have some fun, whatever. Just, no calls, no conversations. Anyway, that's sort of my getting back to my old Amtrak days, I guess. I came through it all just fine. I gave good presentations, met lots of people, lobbied hard, swallowed my pride, and accepted a VIP tour of Fenway Park, which is where we were holding the Boston event. One of my member companies had a client meeting there, and they wanted me to speak, and then we got to take this wonderful VIP tour of the park and go down to batting practice and everything else and watch some of a Phillies Red Sox game. Again, I did it. I also did a couple of sprints up the mountain on a couple of the big elevations and left my friend in the dust, waited up there for him to climb up, and amazingly did not destroy my body during that whole thing. And I maybe made a couple new friends this week. Between that podcast guest in New York City, who you'll hear in a couple of weeks, and Monday night's dinner companion in Washington. That was a fellow podcaster, comics scholar, and archivist. And we'd known each other. We'd seen each other at festivals. We correspond a little bit, but we'd never just sat down and talked. And we got to do that this time. We met at a restaurant that I used to love in DuPont Circle near where I was staying. I used to go to this Thai place in the before time. Apparently it's still a Thai place, but now it is a hipster place with terrible food. So I screwed the pooch on that one. But my pal and I got to sit and talk, and then he just kind of took me on a walking tour around DuPont, showed off some of the great buildings, some of the statues. There's some neat historic stuff down there, and it was a really good time. It was hot as balls out there, so we were both sweating our asses off just standing around in the evening talking comics and everything else. But it was a lot better than just sitting around in my hotel room, if you get me. Oh, and right in the middle of that whole crazy week, I had my oncology check-in, which I probably should have led with. I learned my leukemia has not progressed significantly. I still do not need to consider treatment. And even though I thought this was the time my number was up, it is not. So I'm supposed to just keep going, and I'll go back in 4 months and do that whole thing. So that was a week. I hope to slow down a little, but there's kind of a whole bunch of imperative work I have to do, plus reading for a couple of upcoming podcasts. But I do have next week's show recorded, so this weekend, I hope to get that done, get it all out on time and not be as late as this one is. But for all that frantic behavior, for all the running around and the planning and doing all this other stuff, and having to put on different personae for the different parties that I was speaking to, I kind of feel at ease right now. Like right this very moment just feels like I'm there. And I don't think I even realized that before I hit the record button, but that's something. And it might have something to do with this week's show. See, my guest this time is Swan Huntley, who, well, she has 2 new books out. One is the novel I Want You More from Zibby Books. Actually, it should be I Want You More from Zibby Books. And the other one is You're Grounded, an anti-self-help book to calm you the fuck down. And that comes from Tarcher Perigee. We'll start with the novel. I Want You More is a thriller. It is about a ghostwriter of celebrity memoirs named Zara and the twisted relationship she ends up in with her subject, a Food Network host who can feel the competition breathing down her neck. Zara finds herself falling for Jane, the subject of her memoir, and that turns into a psychodrama of a story about identity, obsession, fame, and of course, murder. So first and foremost, it is a really fun, creepy thriller. I was compelled to just, it was a real page turner by the best definition of that. But the thing is, Swan also, or maybe this is inherent in it, she brings a lot of humanity to her characters. So it's not just plot, kind of grabbing you and taking you along. You feel for these people. She lets us into not just her first person narrator, the ghostwriter, but the people she interacts with. And there are single white female vibes, lesbian romance, a lot of exploration of celebrity and how it warps people, both the audience and the celebrity. But again, fun plot, great dialogue, a good set of rules governing how the narrator behaves, if you understand, and how and why she's able to dole out information to the reader and keep other stuff kind of secret as it all makes sense in terms of how the narrative is built and what the rules of the game are. So summer is officially starting this week, and I Want You More makes for a great beach read. So get that. A beach read that you will continue thinking about. I'll put it that way. Now, Swan's other book is You're Grounded, an anti-self-help book to calm you the fuck down. It's an illustrated guide, I guess, to how to escape anxiety and distraction and just take in the moment, like I was talking about before. And by illustrated, I don't mean, this grand drawing style. It's this non-sophisticated, almost stick figure, at times stick figure drawings. Swan renders herself as a sort of stick figure bird person. But they're really effective at carrying you along with her text. I'll say it's a quick read if you don't slow down to stop and consider what the book is there for, which kind of defeats the purpose. So while it seems quick, linger on the pages, linger on the text and the images. You're Grounded, it reminded me a little of the book by Joe Pera and Joe Bennett, a bathroom book for people not pooping or peeing, but using the bathroom as an escape, which I do keep in my bathroom. In Swan's case, what she's relating to the reader is intensely personal, but simultaneously universal. That's a real toughie to pull off. I mean, she goes into her own circumstances to bring us, we'll say, wisdom. And the book's got some sort of exercises or prompts in it, but not any sort of do this for 15 minutes every morning and you will achieve inner peace. Nothing like that. You're Grounded really feels like a journey. With each page is just a line or two, maybe a paragraph of text and maybe a simple drawing, carrying the reader toward some contemplation of how to live and how to not be, destroyed by the past and future simultaneously, but to find yourself in the present. So it's funny. It's a really entertaining book. It is earnest. It has some practical wisdom about how to live without being quite so frantic as I described, or a slave to your phone or to those aforementioned anxieties. And I read it in a fancy Los Angeles hotel room with my head full of logistics planning for who I was going to see and when and how I was going to get all these projects done, and schedules for the biotech show that I was headed to in San Diego right after LA, and all of these things in my head, all of this planning stuff. How was I going to get the rental car back Sunday night? How was I getting to the train station Monday morning? And just reading this sort of helped me step back and stop futurizing so much and just take in the sunlight. Where I was, the LA light was just beautiful, and I was able to just kind of look up from the book and take that in and appreciate it for what it was. So I am sorry we do not talk enough about You're Grounded in this conversation, but trust me, it's something you should experience. Go look up You're Grounded, how do we call it here? An anti-self-help book to calm you the fuck down. So anyway, they're both good reads. They both got me thinking about who I am and why I'm like this. So go check out Swan Huntley. Now, as caveats go, my voice is kind of shot. I think that was from the drier air. Maybe it was allergies, maybe it was travel, etc. And I talk a lot in this episode. There were reasons, but still, I found myself getting annoyed at myself. Swan was a good sport about it. Now, here's Swan's bio. Swan Huntley is a writer and illustrator living in Los Angeles. Her books include Getting Clean with Stevie Green, The Goddesses, We Could Be Beautiful, The Bad Mood Book, I Want You More, and You're Grounded. She earned an MFA at Columbia University and has received fellowships from MacDowell and Yaddo. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Swan Huntley. Which book do you want to start with? Because they're both fascinating. I love them both in completely different ways, but, novel and...
You choose.
And anti-self-help. Let's start with a novel.
Okay.
I Want You More.
Yeah.
Where did it come from?
So the original idea for this book was spawned when I was working as a ghostwriter, and I was writing the memoirs of a real housewife of New York City. Mm-hmm. And during this process, she said to me, and I quote, "You come into my manna October 21. And I was like, A, I would rather sleep in a box, and B, that's a really good idea for a novel. Like, that's a great setup. What would have happened if I had gone to that woman's manor? What kind of disasters could have transpired? So that was kind of the initial question. And I also see this book as a very dramatized version of all my bad relationships. It's like how I felt in those relationships made exterior and really, really big. That's what I was thinking about the whole time.
So very codependent life in that respect? Or just patterning. Were you patterning yourself after your partners, or were they doing that with you?
I mean, I think, when you get into a relationship and you're falling for somebody, you sort of fall into them in a way. There is this like blurring of lines. You fall into somebody else's life. You're introduced to a new routine. It's easy to lose yourself. So that's what I'm trying to explore. And again, making it exterior, like these women, Zara starts dressing like Jane and starts sounding like her. And she's especially vulnerable in the beginning. Her dad has just died. She feels totally lost. And I did that on purpose.
Mm-hmm. And you gone through that yourself?
My dad did die. So about 5 years ago, which is crazy. It feels like yesterday, but
pandemic time.
I know. Yeah.
But we can laugh about your father's death. That's important.
Yeah. I mean, listen, he was meant to die young. He was not somebody who would have been happy being very old. He liked to go at 110 miles per hour and was unsatisfied with anything less than that. He was so full of life. And, I've done a couple of readings down at bookstores, and somebody's like, why don't you read from the book? And I didn't really think about this. Generally, I just read the very beginning of a book because I don't want to spend time setting it up.
Sure.
But I read the first page or two of this book, and it's all about the dad dying. Like, it's actually really dark and doesn't really explain what the book is about at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's not what when I started it, that's not where I thought it was going.
No.
So,
And I read this in the bookstore, and in it I describe, the dad who's in his dying days, high on morphine, saying nonsensical things. And one of the things that he says, just for no reason, is grass-fed beef. And that really happened. And it was really funny, but I said this to the bookstore, and it was, everybody was silent. Like, we all got really sad.
And yet deep inside, you want to burst out laughing and understand that audience is going to freak the hell out if you push them in that direction. But
right. I was like, we'll get to a lighter question next time. I mean.
Well, let me ask, what was the impulse to thriller? To take that scenario of the ghostwriter in the subject's home. To me, it turns into abstruse commentary and Baudrillard and all this craziness. And you took it in thriller direction. What was the impetus, or what's the allure?
Thrillers are so fun to write.
Yeah.
I am ultimately interested in character. That's my main thing that I'm interested in. But I also like a big plot. I like a book that makes me want to turn the page. And trying to figure out how to dole out information in a way that keeps the reader in suspense is so fun. How to figure out, how do I escalate this drama in a way that feels well-paced and that's going to really hook somebody? And how do I lie to the reader? That's what you're really doing. You're eking out the truth bit by bit. And then there's also the issue of the first-person narrator. I write all my books in first person because I'm very interested in essentially denial, the space between what the character knows and what the reader knows about them. There are a lot of ways to be seeing around the narrator, and figuring those out is so fun.
How much do you plot out before working?
This is a great question.
So I'll say in advance, because I've recorded with Christopher Bolin a couple of times, and he does these very intricate thrillers, which he swears he's writing in the moment. Like, he figures out afterwards, why they're doing X, Y, and Z, and he makes it all work logically. But I'm like, yeah, so I assume that's not
that's amazing. Good for him. Yeah. I will back up and say, I took a very traditional route. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I got an undergrad degree in creative writing. I got an MFA in creative writing. For my thesis, I wrote a book, and they were like, send it out. This is really good. And I did an outline, and everybody was like, you're like a good writer, but nothing happens in this book. And I was like, got upset. Ended up writing an entirely new book, sent it out. Everybody said the exact same thing. Nothing happens in this book, except for this one agent who was like, but if you change all these things, I'll consider repping you. I changed all the things. I went back to him. It was like he had never met me. He was like, what? And I was so upset and felt that I needed to move the plot of my life forward desperately. I was working as a nanny in Soho. I've always had the worst jobs ever, where you cannot possibly get comfortable. Like, there's really been no B plan, which forces the A plan to happen. And I wrote a loose outline of the next book, which ended up being my first published novel, We Could Be Beautiful. And that changed everything. I think before I had been operating, according to that quote, like, writing a novel is like driving in the fog. You can only see 3 feet ahead of you. I forget who said that, but I think that quote is an excuse to not outline, or at least it was for me.
How rigid do you stick with the outline?
I'm not rigid about it. Yeah. I think the fun of writing is figuring out.
What I wondered, whether you had a framework, but you can digress or diverge when you need to.
I think figuring out what are the major plot points, what is the end, what am I driving toward, those things for me are important. But what I always realize about halfway to 3/4 of the way through is the character is not emotionally where I thought they would be, exactly, because I've discovered something in the writing so then I, change the outline as I go.
What's changed for you as a writer over 3 published novels now, in addition to the other work we're going to talk about? But what are you better at, I guess?
Oh my gosh. Well, this is actually novel number 4.
Oh.
And I think that I am better at pacing. I think I'm more concise. My second novel, I reread it because I adapted it into a screenplay to have a film sample. You know, now I live in Los Angeles, and that's what we're all doing here is adapting things for film and TV. Yeah. And I read it, and I was like, this book is 20,000 words too long. So 10 to 20, I should say. And yeah, I think not wasting space and just, as I said before, the suspense, I think I've gotten better at that.
What were your sort of thriller influences? You know, who were you reading? Or what drew you into the genre, I guess?
Yeah. You know, my first two books were labeled as thrillers. I really felt that they were character studies, but this is...
It's what other people say and not who you think you are. So, yeah.
Exactly. So it's really a question of marketing, you know. This one, though, it was intentional. And who did I read? I read some ton of French before I wrote this. I read Stephen King's Misery, which strangely I had never read before. And I think he's so good at drawing character. That book, I would say, is at least 20,000 words too long. Mm-hmm. It's actually very slow.
The only King I've ever read is his book on writing.
Oh, yeah.
Which is an embarrassment because I should actually read the writing before getting to the, you know, this is how you end up as a writer. But yeah. Yeah,
he's not bad. And Dennis Lehane, who was a professor of mine in undergrad and who's been a great supporter of mine, I think he is very smart on a language level and on a plot level. I think you don't always get those two things together when you're looking in the thriller section.
Yeah. Yeah, there's we used to call them airport novels. Now it's beach reading, I guess. Although I did read most of your book on the plane. So it was an airport book. It was an airport PDF, but still an airport book, you know. Do you wish you had taken up the ghostwriting, the manor visit?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No. She wanted me to come watch her do her photo shoot for the cover of her book.
My wife is a photographer and just last year did a book with Al Roker and his daughter, like just photographing the food. And then she did the cover and the lifestyle stuff at Al Roker's home and you know, came out of it with some fun stories. The idea of having a writer there in the process would not be, unless
it's not necessary.
Unless it's to observe what they become.
This was also the height of the pandemic.
Sure.
I mean, it was...
I'm hip.
Didn't make sense.
But yeah, I wonder about the personae, I guess, who people become, which your characters are in the process of doing. But at the same time, they're always becoming who they're seen as.
Yes. And that's a very interesting thing with ghostwriting. You know, it really comes down to a question of self-awareness. With the book that I'm talking about that I wrote for The Woman with the Manor, I wrote this book and everybody around us, you know, the agents were all like, wow, you captured her so correctly. And I thought, I know, you know, I feel like I'm a professional eavesdropper. I think that's my real job. And she read the book and she said, this is not me. And so that was about I assume, you know, the divergence between how I see her and how I see herself. But also it's about how she wants to be perceived by her audience, of course. And so she basically went back in and changed a lot. And it's now a much less interesting cookie cutter version of her. So this is the difficulty with ghostwriting. You know, you can do something really technically well. It's ultimately about eavesdropping and about recording information and organizing information. And I'm a person who's both very creative and very organized. So it's technically very easy for me, but it's an unwinnable game because you can't mind read and you're expected to be a mind reader. And when you're dealing with somebody who, you know, has issues, like people have issues, it's really, really tough. I just got into another situation where I wrote a proposal for an actress. And it was the same thing where I felt like, okay, I've captured her voice. I've created a story arc for her. I felt like I did the best I could do. And she ultimately said, I don't think you've captured my voice and I'm keeping half the money. And that is industry standard. So, yeah.
It reminds me of my very first trip to LA. I recorded with a musician, producer, songwriter who wrote a lot for other artists and had a very scandalous thing where he sort of created a hugely successful artist who then denied that anyone else was involved in that creation but herself. I'll tell you off mic, of course. But I asked about lessons from that. And he said, you can't write who they're not. You gotta find out who they are as a person before, in this case, writing songs for them. But I imagine, in the process of trying to get someone's life across, the life that they want to convey as a brand, which is a big topic throughout both books, actually, as we're going to talk about with You're Grounded too. The sense of reality, I guess, is pivotal. I guess the question is, and it's something I've had to work through doing this, how'd you learn to listen?
I was just an observant child. Like, the story about me is when I came out, when I was born, I just opened my eyes and looked around. This is like a family, part of our family lore. And the sister under me, I'm the oldest of four, screamed, and that kind of was her personality. And then the third one came out like a football, and my brother, I don't know. But people would always say about me when I was young, oh my God, her eyes are so big. It was like my eyes were too big for my face. And it's perfect. I mean, that was exactly it. And I can just remember being in preschool and sitting in the back, feeling like I wasn't really a part of the group, which is, I think, what it feels like to be a writer, to feel like, I always feel like I'm writing things down in my mind as they're happening. I'm somehow separate from what is happening. I just remember looking at all the heads of the kids in front of me and wondering about them, not paying attention to what the teacher was saying. And I have a lot of other memories like that, but that's a very early one.
The social misfit aspect of being a writer, it was like having a force field around me as a kid. It was the other kids realized there was something wrong with me also. I mean, not that you necessarily had something wrong, but I think we know deep down it's the rest of them can tell that one's watching us, or that one's paying attention to things that we're not paying attention to. The book and the other stuff I've read about you, doing my prep in the last couple of days, the creation of identity. When you mentioned coming out before, I didn't realize you were referring to birth in that instance, but the sense of defining yourself and figuring out yourself, as Zara too identifies herself with Jane, and you make her father a sculptor, somebody who's also molding stuff into the shape that he wants. Talk about that, I guess, the unfolding of identity, or the finding of oneself, and how you convey that in prose and maybe in your day-to-day life, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. Several things come to mind when you say that. I mean, one thing back to denial, it's amazing how much we can keep from ourselves. The psyche is an amazing thing. I've come to believe at this point that things will fall off the shelf when they're meant to, and I don't need to go looking for anything. But looking back at the astounding amount of evidence that I was both gay and a pretty committed alcoholic and drug addict, and was able to tell myself for years, no, it's fine, no, it's fine, no, it's fine.
Now I can handle this.
Yeah, I can handle this. I mean, it's just amazing. I think the reason is because I wasn't ready to know those things until I was ready to know them. I wasn't ready to step into those identities until I was. I think too, I don't know. I have sort of, I don't know, I not wanted to be put in a box, and I think when I apply that thinking to my career right now, it's like people are like, wait, you're writing a novel and you're doing this other illustrated thing? Please explain, So there's something about being boxed in.
Listen, we connected through Jen Silverman.
Right.
Jen
does everything.
Introduced to me because of a novel. I get told they're the most produced playwright in the country. Then it's, oh yeah, here's my poetry collection. And oh, by the way, I'm writing for Tokyo Vice. And so all writing and creativity, but, all over the gosh darn place. And, Jen's brother, Chris, has the incredible daily art practice that just kills me because I kind of fell out of my own regular art thing. But anyway, yeah, that sense of I guess who we are and who we're supposed to be. Again, this ties back to the issue throughout I Want You More of brand versus reality, how we want to be seen, and how limiting that can be in terms of what we get praised for, what we're seen for. The idea of framing everything through a ghostwriter whose job is not to be seen, but, to evoke the words is a pretty good creative instrument, I guess.
Thank you. I have been thinking about how there are way too many fictional books in which the protagonist is a writer. I'm like, can we not think of something else for these people to do?
Writer or editor are the jobs that allow them to just go do whatever the hell they're going to go do.
It's ridiculous. So I was sort of like, oh, ghostwriter, but it just feeds so perfectly into the theme of this book.
Yeah.
So I went with it.
Memoir? Before we get to your grounded, I did notice you made a comment in an interview about memoir.
Yeah.
As in you're making one. So
yes, I'm very excited about this actually. And back to identity, I feel like I finally got into a place where feel comfortable talking about myself. I think I've just gotten a lot more comfortable with who I am as hopefully we're all doing as we age. The memoir, well, I'll say also, it's interesting that I'm finally writing nonfiction now, because when I was applying to MFA programs, I was really interested in nonfiction at that time, and I applied to both programs, and I actually at Columbia got into both, and I think I would have chosen nonfiction, but the fiction people gave me some money, so I was like, okay, I'll do this. So this has felt like something I've wanted to do for a very long time. I also just keep thinking lately, these lines will repeat themselves in my head, and I, like a self-absorbed person, like we all are, like find a way to like say what I'm thinking, to give the advice that I need to other people, like at every possible juncture. And then I'll eventually hear the thing that I'm saying, and I'm like, dude, you're talking to yourself. So the thing that keeps repeating lately is, if you're not going to be honest, what's the point? Like, what's the point? And I think I'm really in a place where I'm ready to be honest about some stuff. So the book, the memoir, it comes out at some point next summer. Don't know when yet. It is called How to Escape Yourself or Die Trying, an Addict and a Really Long Bike Ride. And it is interwoven narratives. One is about my pilgrimage on El Camino in Spain, which, if people are unfamiliar, it is a 500-mile pilgrimage. There are actually many Caminos, but the Camino Frances, which is the most popular one, is you go across the top of Spain, and people did this in the 10th century as a penance, and now people do it to be like vaguely spiritual. People who are looking for a transformation go there. So it's a really interesting group of people. I did this by myself on a bike. It was really, really, really hard. And the reason that I did it is because I was spinning in circles with some of my addiction stuff in LA, and I realized later, I think I'm just trying to get out of the circle and go in a straight line. Like, I think that is physically and literally and psychically what I'm attempting to do. And the other narrative is my addiction history. So that ties in with what I just said. I think there are a lot of addiction memoirs out there, and most of them follow this boilerplate, which is 90% of the book is, I got wasted, I did some coke, it was kind of glamorous, right? These are the glamorous addictions, much hotter than like food addiction or sex and love addiction or, shopping addiction. And then in the last 10%, it's like, and then I got sober and like, and it's chill, peace. That's basically most sobriety memoirs that I read. And I realized that is so not true to how addiction is, or how it has been for me. Long before I was addicted to alcohol and drugs, I was addicted to fantasy. This is what saved me as a child. And it's interesting because it's also now what I do for a living. So it's a very fine line between like what is good for me and what is then destructive. Yeah. I can take one morsel and make up an entire life in my head around it. And yeah. And then it was the drugs and the alcohol and the whatever. And then I got sober, and then it was just something else. It's not about the thing you're addicted to. It's about the feeling of addiction in general, the feeling of wanting to fill a void that is never going to be filled by some external thing. So I'm hoping to paint an accurate portrait of what it's really like.
I'll say I haven't had a drink in 12 years, but in my case, it was urologist advice. And I always have to tell people, unfortunately, I have no bottoming out story or anything weird. It was just, Gil, booze, caffeine, and spicy food. And I thought, I'll try booze first and see. And it's turned out to be, A, no symptoms ever again, and B, the easiest, I think. My wife is Cajun, and I run on coffee. So I thought, yeah, let's see what happens if I just stop with the gin. And yeah.
Wow.
But again, to normal people or to anyone with an addiction issue, that's small potatoes, all things considered. I know you were writing then, but could you have become the writer you are while you were still using?
I remember when I first got sober, I said this to someone in AA because I got sober halfway through grad school. So my life looked really good. It was like I lived in this really cute apartment on 83rd and Riverside, and I was, going to school, and I had started running. I had started searching in other ways, which is what a lot of people do right before they get sober. It's like maybe Buddhism, maybe that. And I was very high functioning. I was also grew up in an environment of very high functioning people who liked to feel good. So coming back to identity, this brings up a whole issue of like double lives. It's like, this is who I am in secret. This is who I am for you. And, I remember saying like, but I'm okay. Like, I think I can still have a career because I'm so dogged. I'm so committed. I'm like relentless, but I don't think I would have enjoyed it. That's what the person said back to me. She's like, yeah, you probably could, but you'd be empty. And that's, yeah.
What addiction does.
Yeah. That's that's how I felt at the end,
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
This makes me so emotional.
Actually emotional.
No.
I apologize
No,
on a
let's
Sunday
get emotional.
morning.
Who cares?
I'm good. Yeah.
No, I remember like toward the end of my drinking, I would leave this cute apartment on 83rd and Riverside, and there was a mirror in the entryway, and I would look at myself as I was going out, and I would be like, your life is a lie, dude. Like, it felt like I was totally empty, but things looked good still, You
didn't go to the High Life Bar and Grill, did you?
Not that I recall.
Like 80th in Amsterdam, around there. It's one of my former haunts back in the day. So good. Especially I'm older enough than you that we never would have crossed paths. And what is it, boy? She's drunk. But yeah, it sort of feeds into the question of your book that's coming out now. You're Grounded, mm-hmm. which you refer to as an anti-self-help book.
Yes.
Tell me about it. I mean, I read it, but you tell me, what is anti-self-help?
Okay, well, the full title of the book is You're Grounded, an anti-self-help book to calm you the fuck down.
Yes.
And I've come to understand at this point that everything that I do is just a conversation with myself that I'm letting other people in on.
Yes, the next one I have is it yourself that's being helped is what I wrote. So thank you for
completely. That's it. You can check that off.
Ding.
Yeah, I think it's like, how do I get grounded? And then I think, I often think about how we're all mostly going through the same stuff. Like, how can I talk about this in a way that might be useful to other people and in a way that's not like horribly earnest? I think so many things in the self-help space are just so earnest, and that is not what feels true to me. It just rings false. I think, adding some humor into it, that I can hang with. The whole thing is funny. Like, what are we even doing here? Yeah. It's hilarious. And so, it's interesting too to work in this other space. It's an illustrated book. It's an illustrated interactive book that has a journal style element. So whenever I work in a different medium, it brings out a different side of me. It brings out sort of a different voice. So it's really fun to just see what comes out. And I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this. I mean, it takes not very much time to write these books, and it's so fun.
Where did drawing start for you?
Drawing started for me at Yaddo. I went there to write my third novel, Getting Clean with Stevie Green. And, you write to these people and you say, this is what I will be finishing. It's always good to say, I'll be finishing it. And I just did not feel like writing this novel. And I doodled something and I took a picture of it and I put it on Instagram. And I had never really understood what to do with the Instagram square before that. A lot of other writers have like their laptop in front of a lake with like a cute mug, so I was like, this is not me.
And the filters.
The filters, not me.
Great unearthly color in your living room. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that, presenting myself in a way that's not real. I mean, to some degree, we're all doing that on social media, and I'm guilty of this too, but I try to be real, and I realized, this is a really fun way to use this. This feels actually useful. This feels like I'm making something, I'm having fun with this, and I'm sharing it with people. And I got an immediate gratification from the responses that you don't get with novel writing. Novel writing, you're alone in a room for a really, really long time. By the time the book comes out, I barely even remember what that book says.
Yeah, which is why I feel kind of bad interviewing authors, when their books are out. It's one of those, I know you finished this 18 months ago, but, tell me what you were going through back then, 2 years before that when you were writing. But, yeah.
I mean, that's just part of it. Then it kind of jogs your memory when you do all this press stuff and you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's what it was. But yeah, it's so slow. It's such a slow process. And then sometimes people will like write me on my website or be like, I read your book and I really like this part. And I'm like, oh, I forget people even read this stuff,
Same thing with this.
Yeah. I'm just entertaining myself alone in a room. I think this is what I was meant to do.
And that the drawing turned into a sense of people like this and I should keep doing this, which is not to say that it's an addiction thing, but it's an addiction thing too in its own way. But
I mean, everything is, but I like to say I'm addicted to anything even remotely pleasurable. But yeah, I started doing that and it felt good and really fun. And then a few years later, I was on a hike with my friend who happens to be an agent. And I was saying to her, dude, I cannot ghostwrite anymore. I have to figure out some other way to add to this career. I'm like a very focused blinders on person, and that's a good thing sometimes, but it's also not a good thing because to put all your eggs in the novel basket is just not a smart thing to do. It does not make sense. Yeah. So to be working in multiple mediums is like, whoa, this is the answer. But my friend said, why don't you do something with those drawings that you have on Instagram? This is the type of proposal that you write. People like journal style books. Just write a proposal. And I wrote a proposal in like a day and sent it out, and that's it.
How'd you come up with the imagery or the model for your avatar? We'll say the bird person.
I knew you were going to ask that. It's so funny. It just sort of naturally evolved. I don't remember the moment in which it happened. I do remember many years ago, like drawing myself as a stick figure and feeling like this isn't completely right, and then drawing myself as a swan and feeling like that's not completely right. That's a little on the nose, and being like, what am I going to be in these? And really sort of like pushing it. It felt like I was trying to force it into something. And then I think I just let it go and it naturally evolved. I don't remember when, but it feels like it's me.
And the lessons of You're Grounded?
The lessons of You're Grounded, I mean...
And again, anti-self-help.
Anti-self-help. But ultimately, it's about slowing down. It's about all the noise that's happening and how do we find ourselves within that? How do we get quiet? How can we look at nature and connect with it? I have a whole thing about trees in there. I love trees. I think everybody loves trees.
That's how I started drawing. I turned 50. I watched the first episode of Painting with John on HBO, the John Lurie show. Watched In and of Itself a day later, the Derek DelGaudio thing. I'll send you a link to this. You need to experience it without looking anything up about it.
Okay.
Trust me. And then I just picked up a pad I had, went out in the backyard and started drawing trees. And then...
Really?
Yeah, I never drew in my life and discovered a chunk of what you were talking about. And I've talked about it on the show with some of the artists I've recorded with. The voices stop. Mm-hmm. It just turns into the eye and the hand. And it's just, and I joke that the early drawings look like a stroke victim regaining function in his hand. And you see over just like 2 or 3 weeks, like, oh, he figured out what he was doing. And you know, everything starts becoming more and more real, but it's still just stilled everything for the longest time. Then, of course, I let it all back in and, you know, corrupted everything I was trying to do. But, you know, short version was, you know, I actually found some peace in that. So I was able to skip the sections that you had on drawing a tree and meditating, just because I knew where you were going with those.
Sure.
But yeah, that sense of finding that sort of easiness in the world. Here's a T-shirt of a tree.
I started drawing trees on shirts.
Very nice.
I don't know what I'm doing with this yet, but I think it would be fun to do something.
You're making something is what you're doing.
Exactly.
And that's what counts.
Who knows what it will be later, but...
I did one on the High Line of these birch trees. And similar to that, except the little notches look more like eyes because of how they work. And I had this instant of, I could add more detail or I could add background to this, or those things could just stand the way they are. And, you know, again, put it up on Instagram and people lost their minds. So, yeah, I like some trees. So, the self-revelation that you go through in the book, or at least the character's self-revelation, your avatar talks about a lot of, I'll say individual problems in a way that universalizes them. Is that where the anti comes in with anti-self-help? Just in terms of it's not really about you. It's about me.
I hadn't really thought of it that way. But, I mean, I think the real reason they put it on there is to show the reader this is not earnest. Yeah. You know, it's just a message. But perhaps it's what you just said as well.
But it works great. So tell me about L.A.
I love LA. Yeah. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in San Diego. My dad is not a sculptor. He was a marine biologist, and he moved to Hawaii when I was 8. So I also spent a lot of time in Hawaii. And I left Southern California when I was 18 and have lived in a lot of different places and came here 6 years ago. And it just feels like home. I'm going to die here. I'm done. I'm done moving. I feel I've done all my research. I mean, I really was that John Kabat-Zinn book, Wherever You Go, There You Are. Like, I kept moving and buying that book and then giving it away when I moved, buying it again.
Yeah, the joke is I live in the house I grew up in.
Oh my gosh,
yeah,
really?
Everybody has that reaction. I've spent about 8 or 9 years outside of that house, but yeah, we haunt each other.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's freaky and weird. And I live in the woods, but I'm 25 miles from New York, so it's you know, for me, the best of all possible worlds. For everybody else, they just try and find a way to leave. But, you know, this is where I get my living in, I guess. I will say, as far as not being accustomed to L.A. goes, I was walking yesterday to the last bookstore, which not so great, but walked through a shoot, not realizing, like I knew there were cameras and everything set up. I just didn't realize how it was the entire block. And so I was, you know, walking along the sidewalk and then realized all of these people, not quite in period costume, but not looking quite like the rest of us, were all standing still. And I was, oh shit, you're waiting to shoot something. You're all on your mark. Okay, I'm just going to get over to the street and get out of here. So yeah, there are those instances where I don't really encounter those in New York City when I'm there, as opposed to being here.
Yeah, it's that. And then, you know, in downtown, it's also a huge tent city and so much homelessness. So it's a real mix of both.
You've been back to San Diego? I was there last year, and it is the Gaslamp District. There are stretches where entire blocks were tents.
Really?
And I was just like, I was there for business, and I'm in a suit, and I was just going to a comic store before my flight was hours and hours away. I'm like, I'll go walk over to the comic shop and find something. And I was like, I'm going to walk down the middle of the street because I don't want to be that guy in a fancy suit stepping over homeless people this whole stretch. I'll rather risk getting hit by a car, and did that. But I had not encountered that before the pandemic. So, yeah. But here, same. I haven't encountered it as much because I'm always driving because it's LA. But, you know.
It's pretty bad. Yeah. I jogged home from the Hollywood Bowl after a Sarah McLachlan concert the other night, and I was actually a little bit scared because it was late at night, and I was like running past some tents, and I thought, ooh, you know, it's just sad. It's just so sad.
But you're a good runner, right?
I mean, I was that night.
Point,
it makes you run.
Put on gas for that sort of thing. But I did want to tell you, there's a graphic novel about El Camino by this Norwegian cartoonist, Jason. I don't know if you've ever encountered his stuff.
No.
He does anthropomorphic strips, so it's animal people. And he usually does these shorter O. Henry-like comics, and then he put out the El Camino, and it is... Sorry, the El Camino. He put out El Camino, and it is just hundreds of pages about this meditative walk on the Camino and the people he encounters on the way. And it's they're all funny animals, but it's an amazing book. I'll send you a link to that too.
Thank you.
I love disseminating weird cultural things, so I have somebody to talk to about them. So, to that end, what's the drawing practice? We're surrounded by a lot of art material.
Yeah. The drawing
and
practice.
Collage too, right?
And collage. I'm working a collage element into my stuff now.
Because you had cutouts from those magazines, and I was thinking it could be ransom notes, but I figured she's probably going collage with this. But
well, I did make a ransom note that said pre-order or else. Yeah. I got 60 National Geographics from somebody named Julie on Facebook Marketplace who worked at a school in K-Town, picked them up, $60 from like the early 80s, which is when I was born. So it's pretty cool to look through these. I sent my 9-year-old friend a picture of an ad with like one of those old Nokia phones. And I said, do you know what this is? She said, no.
Yeah. Because we're old.
Yeah, we're old. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing right now. I want to start selling stuff. This is the next thing that I'm trying to figure out. How can I make some original pieces and sell them? I've had a lot of conversations with some various people over the last few days, and some people said make prints, and I don't think I want to make prints. I'm just trying to have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Have fun and get paid for it.
You do the Patreon thing.
Maybe
people who donate X amount, you send them a piece of art. So that way it's not them buying the art, but it's you support what I do. Here's some of what I do. Yeah.
I think I'll start first on Instagram. Do you have a Patreon?
Yeah. I don't do anything with it. people give me money. And I always, at the end of every episode, as there'll be at the end of this episode, when I do my outro at home, there's always don't give me money, give money to other people and institutions and Planned Parenthood and all these things. I'm a lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry, and I appreciate the support, but that's my my sort of spiel. But I always do, if anybody does a donation or pays through the email that I do every week, they get a handmade postcard. I make some art for them, and it's where the design for my last tattoo came from.
I saw that. I love that. What is that?
That's my greyhound flipped over on a sofa. I drew him and loved how it came out. I put it on Instagram, and one of my tattoo artist friends was like, yeah, that would make great flash. And last January, when I was back in town, I hit him up and said, do you mind putting that on me? He went ahead, 10 minutes, and now I've got Bendico, lounging with his legs kicked up.
I love it.
Or, he's well, it depends on how you orient him, I suppose. But yeah, he's it's what we do with the art. We try to make something that's going to be either lasting or meaningful. When did you start with the art? When did you start really feeling like you were drawing as opposed to doodling?
I fairly recently, I don't know, 4 years ago, something
it's just
like that.
The Yaddo experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always done it though. Yeah. Maybe it started before then. Back when I was drinking at that Upper West Side apartment that I was talking about before. This goes back to the identity thing, and I would drink and write, and then when I was too drunk, I would stop writing, and I would paint. And sometimes I would wake up and see a new painting on the wall, and my other self had cleaned up perfectly, so it wasn't a mess, and I would be like, whoa, I'm two people. But I also,
there's at a minimum, two people.
Exactly. I made art when I was sober too, but I did enjoy having a glass of wine back in those days. But I've always kind of just made stuff on the side. I just enjoy it. And when I think about, I teach some classes now sometimes, and just talking to other writers too, professional writers, it feels like there's this lore about how writing is hard, and people are like, oh my God, my book is due and it's so hard. And I'm like, dude, we're living the dream. This is what our little selves wanted to do.
Yeah.
This was it. And, then I think about how kids make art. Kids just do whatever. So I think trying to stay in touch with that spirit, just like, oh, I have this idea for something, I'm going to make it. I recently was like, I want to take a huge canvas, paint it light pink, cut out a bunch of tiny bouquets from magazines that are, sitting on little tables, and put it on this huge thing and see what that looks like. So I did that.
When I landed, I was here too early on Friday for the hotel, so I went to a couple of galleries first, and I got to go see some of Wayne White's stuff at Hashimoto, and there is this enormous canvas of sky, clouds, everything, just beautifully rendered. He's in this amazing painting, and this little tiny 1970s car floating in the air, just in the middle of all. It's the only object outside of these clouds, and it's striking, and you have this one thing that's discordant in this entire massive canvas. I asked him about it that afternoon. He said, "Well, that's a car. I left the South in." I'm like, well, that makes sense as to why it's there. Okay, you picked that particular one, but yeah, this was when he left Tennessee. That was the actual car, so he put that into the clouds and left it. But it's imagining things in terms of thinking visually, I guess, is very different than thinking in prose.
Yes.
And, what it means to try to, to have an idea in your head for something like that, it gets a different mind.
It does. I mean, language is so insufficient, and I think the whole art world is so funny and a lot of BS, really. And I think this is evidenced in the way a lot of art is described. I have this idea for a painting. I'm going to do this soon. Yeah. I think it's going to have either just a dot or an actual intersection, and it's going to point to either the dot or the intersection and say, this is the intersection between liminal space and the patriarchy. Like, that to me, is like, that's what it is. Like, what? We try to put words to this stuff that's not.
And it's usually the artist trying to make their artist statements, which are not meant for a regular viewer,
right.
Meant for the critics or, something you can tell a buyer or something. I was at the Ed Ruscha exhibit yesterday at LACMA. Not a favorite artist of mine, but it was just one of those. It's here. It was at the Met. I missed it there. I should go see this thing. Or at MoMA. I should go see this and appreciated some of what he was trying to do or had done over the years, but it was a sense of like, this is sort of a creative, to me, it became a sort of creative dead end, except for early stuff he did, which was basically proto-zines.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he had a accordion book of every single building on the Sunset Strip, which is the name of it. And it just goes on and on, folding all these photos he took for the entire length of the Sunset Strip. And I thought, well, he's a zinester, so that's pretty good. I'll take that over the word paintings or some of the very geometric buildings and their configurations. But it's usually those things that we throw off that turn out to be the things that were valuable. The things we think are going to be the big creative statement. I'm projecting. We always tend to overthink and put too much into and maybe even overload to the point at which we can't bear the weight of what we're trying to make. Mm-hmm. So, which is, yes, totally me and not you. So I'm glad we're having this conversation because I know you brought up the same sort of vibe for yourself. But tell me about celebrity. And it plays into I Want You More in a very significant way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. That's such a good question. And nobody has asked me this yet. So I'm about to publish an essay called My Best Friend is Famous. And that is because my best friend is famous. And I met her when I started this book. And I maybe knew famous people, but was never really close to anybody. And I remember the first time we went hiking together, people were like, oh, hey, love your show. Yeah. And then other people would look at her and then avert their eyes. And that was really interesting to me. Just watching all of these reactions to who she is. and also thinking about her and her reactions and how, you know, she's been famous for a long time. She's very used to this, but it's such a rarefied existence. And what this essay is about, is I think that on the one hand, of course, we care about fame. You know, it's famous people are at the top of our pyramid. And this is just like, it's our animalistic duty inheritance to care about the people at the top, right? Like the animals, it's like whoever can reproduce the most. For us, it's whoever has the most money and whoever's famous and whatever. So on the one hand, it's like, okay, we can acknowledge that and we can say, of course, like this society is set up so that we care about these people. We give these people special importance. But in real life, the way that I see people react to my friend is often, it's as if they're saying, well, I don't care and I'm a good person because I don't care.
Yeah, virtue signaling in the other direction. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And my point is kind of like, well, isn't that
It's just a negation. It's the negation that's proving the point.
Exactly.
Yeah. I always have since doing this especially, everybody's Joe. I found the best thing to say is, I've really appreciated your work over the years. It's a nice way to not sound like a stalker, maniac, or be an asshole about things. I will say on the flip, I was on the Acela once, and the governor of New Jersey was on. He got on just a stop after me, one row over. And a guy comes up and says, Governor Murphy, I just want to say, I didn't vote for you, but it's an honor to meet you. This was one of those, like, what asshole says that? Just say it's an honor to meet you, you know. But yeah, just we have to make our way of perceiving it known, I guess, whether, again, it's that negation or just the adulation in the process.
Right. And
feel free to steal that anecdote, by the way.
Oh, I will. Yeah. Thank you.
But yeah, how they're seen.
And I asked some of our mutual friends, you know, how do you feel about this person's fame? And some of these people were like, oh, I don't care. I don't see it. And I just thought, this is a crock of shit. Yeah. This is a total crock of shit. I'm not buying it. This is just not true. So yeah, that very much informed, you know, Jane in a way that I often don't even know what I'm writing about until later. And then I see, oh, these are my issues that I like worked out in this book. You know, it's like the art descriptions, you know, I'm making stuff for the purpose of making it. All the descriptions later, it's like, if that's somebody else's job people are going to interpret things however they want. But I realize now, like, oh, I was really putting a lot of my impressions of this friend of mine into this book. And
did they read it?
She has not read it yet. No.
Okay. Are you wondering what's going to happen?
No, I don't care.
I just wasn't sure.
She'll be fine. No. No, I mean, she's nothing like Jane. She's sort of like, you know, just like being,
Yeah, just the effect. I understand, not the personality. Yeah. But yeah, I just wasn't sure if there'd be that moment of, you took blah, blah, blah from our life and put it into this, you know.
No, I don't think it's not quite that direct.
Sense of religion?
Religion?
Yeah. And was it part of quitting and everything else?
I have a 12-step God. You know, the 12 steps, God is part of that. I didn't get that at first. I was like, God's going to swoop down and take the wine out of my hand. What? Do not understand this. But I think it goes back to, like, it doesn't work to put any external thing into the hole in your soul. You know, it's not going to work. It has to be some invisible thing like God. I also think, you know, is God real? Is God not real? I don't understand the hang up about this question. I don't like philosophy. I don't like questions that are not answerable. It's not interesting to me. It seems like a waste of time. What matters is what you believe. And I think that believing in a God is just makes life a little bit more magical, you know? That is my personal feeling on it. I think too, religion has a lot of, you know, there are a lot of great things about religion. I grew up as like a fake Catholic. I went to Catholic school, but like we weren't really, like we just wore the uniforms, which I loved. And when I was 19 years old, I moved to France for a year to be an au pair with this family, and they were Jewish. And I thought, this is awesome. These people have such a community. Also, they have the best parties. Like, this is great. You know, and then of course there are all the problems. We're just all doing the same thing and we think we're different. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'll go with that. That kind of holds up in a lot of respects as to how we try to compare, this, that, and the other. The question that I always ask people, and I should have warned you about, but we only had a few days to build up to this. What are you reading?
Ooh, what am I reading? Gosh, I'm reading a lot of things right now. Pico Iyer's Beginner's Guide to Japan is a series of, I guess, vignettes, maybe even moments. It's kind of like a Sarah Manguso style, like 200 arguments, very staccato beats. Mm-hmm. His impressions of Japan. He's lived there for over 30 years and he's not Japanese. Thought of our friend Jen Silverman, of course, because she lived in Japan, has worked on Tokyo Vice. Gosh, what else am I reading right now? I don't know. That's what I read most recently.
Mm-hmm. Too much poetry?
Poetry, I don't
either reading
seek
or writing
out a lot of poetry.
Yeah. But
I like reading it. I think, again, our friend Jen probably sends me more poetry than anyone.
Because
she's a poet.
That's her whole thing, just trying to get the rest of us all, into her cultural world here. So,
yeah.
Although getting to meet her in person, I was awfully happy. We recorded remotely the first time because pandemia, and got to do an in-person this time. So I brought pie, which is always, if you're ever in, North Jersey or New York State, and we record another one of these, I will show up with strawberry rhubarb or something similar. But, besides the memoir, next book?
I don't know. I'm working on editing the memoir right now. I'm focused on visual art at this exact moment. It feels like that's what I'm being called to do. I'm also interested in adapting this book for the screen or working in a room. Next novel, I have some vague ideas about it, but nothing hard-boiled enough to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you never should. It's just I'm working on it or I'm not working on it. Nobody wants to jinx their shit.
Right.
You know exactly what it's going to be is the life of Napoleon. And it's always a disaster from there. Usually when I come back to guests a couple of years later and they've mentioned what they were working on, none of that has come to fruition at any point. So I'm not jinxing the memoir. It sounds like that's far enough along. So, I do hope we can get together and sit down for that one too, though. So,
yeah.
But you're happy in LA? Things are a good life? You made it through pandemia?
Made it through pandemia. It was a dark time. I feel like my life has expanded a lot since then. People say about LA, it takes about 5 years to feel like you live here. And I think I just recently feel like, I live here. I've kind of found my people. I've moved a lot. And whenever you move, you make starter friends. It's like, why don't you have lunch with my cousin's sister's brother? And you're like, cool, I'll drive to Venice and do that. And that's nice. But then later you look up and you're like, this person doesn't need to be my very close friend. This is a quarterly lunch companion. It just takes a while to find people, I think, because LA is so sprawling and we're in our cars and stuff. So now I feel like I live here and I love it.
Swan, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I enjoyed the heck out of both books and was not expecting the thriller to take place the way it did in I Want You More. I was not expecting to be quite as stilled as I was by You're Grounded. So, I want to thank you for both gifts.
Thank you so much for coming over. This has been so fun.
And that was Swan Huntley. Her new books are I Want You More from Zibby Books and You're Grounded, an anti-self-help book to calm you the fuck down from Tarcher Perigee. I enjoyed them both, and with summer upon us, the novel especially would make for some fun reading, but You're Grounded makes for some good thoughtful reading about, who you are and how you ended up that way. You should go check out Swan's site, swanhuntley.com, for more about her writing, art, interviews, appearances. There's links to a whole bunch of essays she's done, which I think will be part of that memoir project, and more. And her Instagram feed is a lot of fun. That's also Swan Huntley, all one word in both cases, SwanHuntley. I'll have links to that and her books in the show and episode notes for this one. You can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Tell them there's this podcast comes out every week with really interesting conversations with all sorts of fascinating people. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, or who I should record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. You can do that by sending me an email, by sending me a postcard or a letter. I put my mailing address at the bottom of the newsletter that I send out twice a week, which you can sign up for through my site. It's free. Or you can leave a message on my Google Voice number. That's 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long. So if you go longer than that, you'll get cut off. Just call back and leave another message. And let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with listeners, but I would never run something like that without the speaker's permission. So, let me know. And now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me, at least not right now. I'm doing a Kickstarter later this year for the book that I'm making of Instax photography of guests and past guests. And, well, anyway, it'll make sense when you see it. But really, if you have money, give it to other people. Go through Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, Patreon, Crowdfunder, all those crowdfunding platforms. And you'll find people there who really need help making rent, making medical bills, veterinary bills, car bills, getting an artistic project going. You'll find people who just a couple of dollars could help make a difference in their lives. So, try and help out that way. Or you can give to institutions. I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month, make occasional contributions to the Poor People's Campaign. I make targeted election contributions, but I'm a lobbyist, so that's part of my day job. But there are other things you can donate to: Planned Parenthood, Women's Choice, Freedom Funds. There are a lot of things you can do with a little money to help build a better world. So, I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.